Russell. So please settle down. Brian, will you be in charge of the lights, please?
You want me to switch these lights?
Victor will tell you what to do.
What have you lost?
The car went off fixing. Okay.
There it is, love.
Oh,
Sorry, I was
Julian,
use that
we're
chair.
coming.
I just do that. I know you
Get
will.
on through there.
Floor, they do.
Oh, the table before.
Just a touch,
You know,
yes.
rubbish dogs, I mean, they want the chair, you don't say, you don't say get off, you just go like
That's
that.
it.
They get the- just-
They must be fine.
They get the message. I mean,
The Muslims were saying that
Julian, I'm not
he was
talking.
Muslim.
Right, do I start? Right.
Put your hands together for Victor. No interruptions, and when he's finished, I'll open it up for questions and statements.
Okay. Right, Bertrand Russell is one of our heroes. There's a picture of him somewhere amongst our pictures. Anyway, just a bit of his biography. He was born in 1872 and lived till 1970. So he covered the First and the Second World War, and also the Vietnam War. And he's quite well known to us through his anti-Vietnam War political activism.
Where he died, is that Wales with a name like that? Or-
Looks like it.
Brian could help me on that one.
That's definitely Wales.
Called Booty.
Here's some pictures of him. The one that one there was when he was a young man, and he was fairly high up in the establishment at that time. In his latter day, he was very anti-establishment, and that's how we know him, more of him than in his early day. Oh,
What was it? F5, I think it's.
hit the wrong button, sorry. Okay. In his early time, he was a technical philosopher, and that's not how we know him. We know him more as a social philosopher, as you know, as I said, anti-Vietnam War activism and other things, which I'll outline in just a moment. So he was a founding figure in the analytic movement in Anglo-American philosophy, and he was a Nobel Prize winner in 1950. And his contribution in logic, epistemology, and the philosophy of mathematics established him as one of the foremost philosophers of the 20th century. Could I assume that most of us are familiar with Anglo-American philosophy is analytic philosophy? Are we all familiar that there's a big divide in philosophy, in technical philosophy? Basically, you've got the European philosophers and the Anglo-American philosophers. And the Anglo-American philosophers, the nature of it and so forth, was heavily influenced by Bertrand Russell, right? The continental philosophers, some of the names that will be familiar to us will be Jean-Paul Sartre. Are we familiar with that name?
Yes.
And you've got Heidegger, and you've got Husserl, and you've got Hegel, people like that. And there's a considerable divide in the nature of the philosophy of the continental people and the Anglo-Americans. And that's because the Anglo-Americans were influenced by Russell, who was a British man, whereas the people over the other side of the channel, you know, they're a different mob. Okay, he was born in their country home of his parents, Lord and Lady Amberley. His grandfather, Lord John Russell, was the youngest son of the 6th Duke of Bedford in 1861. Duke of Bedford. In 1861, after a long and distinguished political career in which he served twice as Prime Minister. So his grandfather was the Prime Minister of England, and so he was ennobled by Queen Victoria as the first Earl Russell. And then Bertrand became the third Earl Russell in 1931. So in that early time he was obviously a very establishment figure. To the general public, including us, he was best known as a campaigner for peace and as a popular writer on social, political and moral subjects. During a long, productive and often turbulent life, he published more than 70 books and about 2,000 articles. He married 4 times, became involved in innumerable public controversies and was honoured and reviled in almost equal measure. Russell's article on the philosophical consequences of relativity appeared in the 13th edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, and I drew most of this material from the Britannica, the current issue, which is on DVD. You can no longer get it on paper, but you get the full dope from the DVD version of EB, Encyclopaedia Britannica. For a subject like this, just as, because most of you all also know another major encyclopedia out there in the world, Wikipedia, and for most purposes you would just go to Wikipedia because it's very convenient, you're on the web and you've got it. But when you want some solid, authoritative writings of something, such as about Bertrand Russell, there's no alternative to Encyclopaedia Britannica. It is peer-reviewed, it goes through the hoops, there are academic editors and referees, so the articles that appear in the Britannica are basically peer-reviewed articles. So if you want the real dope, you go to Encyclopaedia Britannica. Wiki doesn't cut it. Alright, in summary, his early life was in technical philosophy, which were profound achievements, but that's not how we as humanists know him. How we know him as anti-war campaigner, and so on. I said that before. For me personally, I find his technical achievement of more significance than his social achievements, because when it comes to arguing and disputing and challenging people in the political sphere, you find Russell's analytical philosophy is a tremendous tool and powerful weapon to hone your arguments. And one of the most important is that, is this working? The book which is about the theory of description. Okay, now the books, these are some of the major books. Articles in the philosophy of mathematics, lots of them. Philosophical consequences of relativity, which I already mentioned. The principle of mathematics. On denoting, that's the one that really applies to me. I'll just mention that, I'll get on the map after I just mention these books. Principia Mathematica, which was followed on from the principle of mathematics, which was a sort of a more basic level, and then he, together with Alfred North Whitehead, wrote this colossal tome, Principia Mathematica. None of us is capable of reading that book. You have to be a high-powered mathematician to be able to read and understand it. But it's there, and it's authoritative, and it had a tremendous impact on the intellectual world in the high-level mathematical world. Analysis of mind, that starts to get close to what we talk about. And Daniel Dennett, undoubtedly that book would would have influenced Daniel Dennett in his formative years, and the analysis of matter. Now, in the social period, principles of social reconstruction, roads to freedom, and the prospects of industrial civilization. I haven't read any of these books myself. What I find is that I have far too many books to read. There's a tremendous explosion, and when you're confronted with somebody like Russell, who has covered the whole field, just to read his books, I think I could spend a lifetime to just read his books and read nothing else.
And then you'd end up like him, married 4 times.
I'll get on to that in a minute. He was initially sympathetic to the Russian Revolution. This is quite a famous story in 1917. But when he visited the Soviet Union in 1920, he came back with a deep and abiding loathing of Soviet communism, particularly of Stalin, and the whole practice and theory of Bolshevism. He talked about it, and so that's in that book. So if you wanted a detailed account of what he came to think about Soviet communism, that's where you go. Right, now on...
Why? Oh, sorry, I'll ask you later.
All right, now other books on education, 1926, that should have a dot point, somehow I've got missed out. Marriage and Morals in 1929. Now, Marriage and Morals was one of the very significant books that got him offside with the establishment. He was in New York at the time, and as you know, the Americans are much more Puritan than even the British. This book really scandalised the Americans, and he was basically banned. He wasn't allowed to say things. Also, he was just basically muzzled. You know, the Americans just stopped him from talking. And that book had a big impact on his finances, because up to that time he was earning a reasonable income. But that book so defamed himself that he finished up broke and was scrabbling around trying to find how he was going to survive. Okay, then Conquest of Happiness, enjoyed large sales and helped establish Russell in the eyes of the general public as a philosopher. Important things to say about moral, political and social issues. Okay, so that book came the year after. I think from my reading, it was written in a degree of desperation, you see. I mean, that Marriage and Morals sort of really set him back with the establishment. And so he had to reach directly to the public. And so that 1930s book achieved that to a great degree and solved his financial problems. Because that was the only, from then on, that was the only way he could earn an income, and that is to write books which the public would buy and royalties would then sustain him. He had a famous public lecture, Why I'm Not a Christian. Now, in amongst our books here, we might have a copy of that. I used to have a copy of it, but I can't find it. But
I've got one at home if you want one.
I've got one too.
okay.
I've read it
That's
on the
why you
internet.
can't find it.
It was many years ago.
Yeah, it would be good to have a copy of it here,
I've got a small
because in the lead up to my deconversion, you see, in my early days as an undergraduate at university, I was with the Evangelical Union, the most fundamentalist part of the Christian movement. Peter Jensen, you know, the Archbishop of Sydney, who's retired recently, he and his immediate predecessors had an enormous influence in Sydney University. And I, being a sort of open-minded person, like a lot of other people, were got at by the Christians, and so I finished up in the Evangelical Union. But that's another story, which I'll tell on another occasion. But even to this day, I still get got at by Christians. When we first moved to Rockdale, there's a shuffly old Chinese woman. You know, she shuffles around Rockdale. And she was always friendly, a big smile and everything. And one day I helped her and so forth. And then it was only after that I got a bit close to her that I realised why she was so friendly. There was an ulterior motive. She was a Christian, and she wanted to promote the Chinese Christian Grace Church or something like that, and you know, trying to approach people to join. And so the Christians are very active. But anyway, that book in lead up 1968 sort of gave me a very coherent introduction to non-religious thinking, and then that together with a number of other things showed me the light. Showed me the light.
Show a different light.
Different light.
They tried to show me the light when he tried to show me the light when I had a school in the SCM, you know, Student Christian
Yes.
Movement. Always tried to show me that
Yes.
could help me to see the light. I tried hard and I never could.
That was a competing group at Sydney University, SCM, to the Evangelical Union. Okay, then there's History of Western Philosophy, 1945. That's a very important book to read. I never got around to reading it, which I think of all the books that I want to read would be that one.
It's extraordinary.
Because it's a very scholarly piece of work, and it brings together all the stuff. You know, I'm interested in enlightenment, and we got it all adopted at the annual convention and everything. And in order to develop that line of thinking, that History of Western Philosophy is a must-read. It'll have it all there. It'll be terrific stuff, all in the one book. Human Knowledge, Its Scope and Limits, that's pretty good. Anti-Vietnam War. How am I going? Whoa. All right. He had a very turbulent love life. So there are the 4 wives he had. The first one, the marriage there got into a lot of tension during his technical period, and he was a very passionate man, and his technical philosophy was driven by a terrific passion. That passion spilled over to his relationship with women, and so while he was married to Alice, he had a passionate affair with Lady Ottilie Morel. Then the second wife, Dora Black, he had 2 children, John and Kate, and they achieved a lot together, but they adopted open marriage. Now in the 60s, during the what's now known as the second sexual revolution in the world and in Australia, you know, there was a lot of people advocating open marriage, and you'll know Nimbin and Woodstock, you know, you remember all that? Anyway, during that phase, he fell out with Dora, because Dora had 2 other children with another man, and so while he couldn't accept his woman
You can't
having
mix them.
an affair with other men. So there's
children.
sort of, yes, and having children. So there's that sort of two-sidedness continues to this day with sexism and feminism and all that stuff, which is, you know, burbling away there. You have Patricia Spence, the third one, and then Edith Finch, in whom in his 80s he at last found marital harmony.
They can't have children on else.
So when sex wasn't such a determinant.
They've been laughed at, runs the commentary for the delightfully dated trailer immortalised on YouTube. Oh, the reason I mention this, I'm getting back to his theory of description, and you'll remember I talked about denoting. Now, in his theory of description, when we describe something, like I'm describing that projector, or describing Julia Gillard as a female prime minister and so forth. He pointed out in his book there's two elements in understanding meaning, right? There's the denoting aspect, which is fairly obvious, but a very important thing that came across that book, that which taught me, was the other aspect is called connoting, and so a word that describes something also connotes other things. And if you're not careful with the choice of words, while what you intend to denote is fair enough, you can get into serious problems, political problems, embarrassing problems, what have you, because you've chosen the wrong word and it has the wrong connotation. Now,
Excuse me, Victor, can the video take film of you if the lights are all off?
Well, basically, Victor is a very dark image. We can't see him. We can sort of see the screen, but we sure can't see Victor. But,
No, well, we should turn that back light on.
During the back,
Yes, we
yeah, turn the back light on and it will be okay.
yeah, I'm surprised it turned them off, yeah.
Now, there's a joke that I've got on the screen there, but there's another joke that came to mind that wasn't to mind when I wrote it, and that was.
excuse me, for what it's worth, Victor is still pretty dark. We probably need a spotlight for future use. We're not going to solve the problem today, but just to let you know.
Can you read the screen? I mean, can the
Yeah,
people
but
read?
I've got to.
Yeah, but I mean, can the others read the screen?
Yeah.
Yeah, then what's the problem?
Because we're videoing it.
That's all right.
Oh, I see.
They can catch my face later on. I'll
Yeah,
stand
the
at the front.
videoing now.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Turn the lights on at question time.
Free
Yes,
flash.
and then we just catch
No,
the
we need
beginning.
this part
Just get
more
the
than
beginning of
question
the
time.
get the beginning of question time. But anyway, there was a translation of an Italian woman used a phrase which was that Silvana might be able to fill me in, and she used the word loose woman.
Oh, it was someone who was on holidays. She was a northern European lady who went on holidays with a group of other people, and she didn't have much English, but she wanted to talk. So she consulted a thesaurus, and she was a fencer. So she said. This has happened in a tour group, just like you've been in a tour group. Well, just imagine this Dutch lady, so she looked up the thesaurus and she wanted to tell everyone when she was young, she was really supple, a good fencer. And she said, when I was young, I was a loose woman.
Yes. Right?
And everyone went, oh.
So you get the point.
If you look up a thesaurus, if you look up the word gender, it'll go sex, then it'll go homosexual, then it'll go pervert, and then so if you're not sure, you just pervert will do. When he was young, he was pervert.
I see she was probably after the
Okay.
sentiment nimble.
So
Yeah.
what Bertrand
Nimble
Russell
rather
is
than
getting
loose,
there
yeah.
is that you get into these sort of situations. Now that's quite a humorous situation, but you get the point.
Yeah.
You see, the looseness, the suppleness
Yeah.
was what she was denoting, but the connoting was wrong. You see,
Yes.
she had to use the word supple,
Yeah.
right? Then it doesn't have that connotation. Now up there on the board, I've got. So this is sort of a little YouTube thing. Picked on and put down. They don't have the moves or the muscles, but they've got the brains, right? And then the kicker in the baritone voiceover, universal to all movie previews. It is time for the odd to get even.
But what's all this about? Who is speaking in the quotations?
It doesn't
Bertrand
matter.
Russell?
It doesn't matter. This
No,
is not
this is
Russell.
an example.
This is an example to
Whose
illustrate.
is the baritone voice?
It's the voice of authority.
When you hear it on the video, on
The
the
voice of authority.
What
Are
I'm
we
trying
going
to
to actually
illustrate
see
is the denotation and connotation, and this is just something that I picked from random.
yeah.
There's any number that I can pick from, so don't focus too much on the exact example.
It's an example
Don't
of
worry
what
about
Russell's saying.
It's
So we get this.
what's the word I've got here?
Really, it's voice over.
We often refer to this type of thing as play on words.
Yeah.
If you don't get it, don't worry, because it doesn't matter that much.
Doesn't matter.
The point I'm trying to make is the Russell's theory of description. That's the point I'm making.
That the grammatical structures.
Yes. So the general idea at the root of Russell's theory of description, that the grammatical structure of ordinary language are distinct from and often conceal the true logical forms of expressions, has become his most enduring contribution to philosophy.
Wow.
Really?
Yeah.
Gosh.
Now there's a lot in that, and I sort of got to keep
Yeah, well, that's you.
move on.
We have to the name.
Finished.
That's all the slides I've got. Now I've got something here.
We'll have the light on now. You put the light on? Put the front light on?
Yes.
Someone will.
If you put
Stay
the front
there.
light on,
You
there's
stay
more
there.
chance we'll see you.
Yes. Thank you. So you can turn that off, you don't need it anymore, yes?
Oh yes, that's much better.
Yes.
That
I
line
don't-
is,
Yeah, I don't want to put the cover on because it might overheat, but if I do that,
Yes.
it won't overheat. What I want to say now is that
front line.
I mentioned before that Russell was a very passionate man, and one of the passions that was driving him was, in his early life, he was a Platonist. Now, we humanists are basically not Platonists. We are more Aristotelian. Now, this is also a pretty high-level philosophy, but what Platonism is, in a nutshell, is the idea, Plato's idea that somewhere in the universe, not necessarily in space, but in some sort of abstract sense, there are perfect forms. So there's a perfect form of a chair, I think is a classic example, of which all real chairs are sort of poor representations of. In the case of Russell, what he was trying to deal with is that there are perfect forms of logic, and there are perfect mathematical expressions which, if you can identify them and if you can say what they are, it would solve many mathematical apparent contradictions, paradoxes, and it would in a sort of, if you could identify that, you could at a stroke sort of formally say just exactly what's what, right? And he was pursuing that. That's why there was a lot of passion in it, because he thought he could do it. Right. You've got to think just in the next 10 minutes. Just convey to you what he was like as a small kid. His early life was marred by tragedy and bereavement. By the time he was 6, his sister Rachel, his parents, and his grandfather had all died. And he and Frank, his brother, were left in the care of their grandmother, Countess Russell. Though Frank was sent to Winchester School, Bertrand was educated privately at home, and his childhood, to his later great regret, was spent largely in isolation from other children. Intellectually precocious, he became absorbed in mathematics from an early age, and found the experience of learning Euclidean geometry at the age of 11 as dazzling as first love, because it introduced him to the intoxicating possibility of certain demonstrable knowledge. This led him to imagine that all knowledge might be provided with such secure foundations, a hope that lay at the very heart of his motivations as a philosopher. His earliest philosophical work was written during his adolescence and records the skeptical doubts that led him to abandon the Christian faith in which he had been brought up by his grandmother. Now, then when he pursued it, he came to basically a dead end. He found that Platonism could not be sustained. So he started off being a Platonist, and he basically finished up being an Aristotelian, like us. We don't believe there are ideal forms out there. The thing is, actually, religious people find Platonism very convivial, because it's a short step from thinking that they are perfect forms to thinking that somewhere, in some abstract sense, there's a God who created the world in some perfect form. But when it actually became material and implemented, then it all got corrupted, you see. So the Christian faith can find a perfect home in that. But if you are an Aristotelian, and Aristotle was a pupil of Plato, so they finished up actually having a basic disagreement that the world, in order to understand how it works, is an empirical world. You've got to go out and do experiments. You've got to observe it. You've got to see how it actually works. And you might make generalization, and then you of course you've got the whole history. Epistemology is the theory of knowledge. And so how do we get to know things? How do we know that if you get petrol and mix it with air to a certain amount, and you lit it with a match, it explodes? You see, those sort of empirical things are you can't work them out from perfect forms. Perfect form is also a danger for democracy. And one of humanist heroes is Karl Popper. Now, I saw his book here. There, it's right there, very convenient. Karl Popper's 2-volume book, The Open Society and Its Enemies. Now, the first volume of that is devoted to attacking Plato. In other words, Platonism. Because if you believe in Platonism, you would believe in a closed society. Karl Popper advocated an open society, and if there were perfect forms, then you would tend to be like fundamentalist Christians or fundamentalist Muslims, who think that we've got it all, and it's our job to impose it on the world because we know what the perfect form is. You people out there, you're a bunch of heathens. Your mind's been corrupted, and you're basically you basically need to be saved, right? The Open Society says no, it's not that. Things have got to be worked out, and it's all got to be empirically determined. And so that's the significance of Platonism. And
Thanks for that. That was good.
Yes. Now, one of the people that I thought was up on the slide, there were a whole list of names that Russell got into very close working relationship with. One of those is Wittgenstein. Now, I mentioned earlier in the talk that you had the Anglo-American philosophers that were different from the European philosophers. And one of the main linguistic philosophers that's colossally influential is Ludwig Wittgenstein. Now, then there were a number of other people, and one of those other people was a president of the Humanist Society in Britain, the British Humanist Association, for a term in the early days of the humanist movement in Britain, was Professor Freddie Eyre, A.J. Eyre. Professor Eyre wrote a famous book of linguistic philosophy, and Afi's had a quick squiz at the book. It's only a slim volume, and it's called Language, Truth and Logic. and basically it was at that time a contemporary exposition of Bertrand Russell's theory of description, and there's a famous example, something about the King of France, which I don't have here. There's when you look at Bertrand Russell talking about theory of description, and the language has structure and it hides the logical structure, you'll come across this example. And so if you do a search, the King of France is bald, I think probably if you do it even on Google, Bertrand Russell's name will come up, because that's a famous example where he was trying to illustrate the point. The King of France is bald, and he was using that to illustrate his point. So when you say the King of France is bald, does that apply to all King of France, you see? Because it doesn't say any particular King of France. The King of France is bald, you see? But I won't go into that because it starts to twist your brain, and we don't have the energy or time to do that. Thank you very much.